And I think one of the issues was when you have certain essential services like air traffic or air traffic control and travel, that's obviously very unfortunate, and obviously people see that every day, and that's not a great way to be dealing with it every day. I think the biggest issue is really the food and the food programs, and that there's a lot of federal workers who are just not getting paid right now. So they've made a lot of sacrifice, and I think that's just an untenable situation for people not to be get paid for their job. And I think the right thing for both parties clearly was to open the government and to negotiate, which I think they've gotten to the point where this is really kind of a game of chicken for both parties. But it seems like the Democrats have lost a little bit of the leverage that they wanted to have, obviously by some of the moderate Democrats coming across. And so I think it's going to be hopefully a good thing for the country. But clearly the Republicans seem to be in a slightly better position to negotiate for the next 2 or 3 months.
Let's talk about how the negotiations handling these twin issues that we talked about, funding the government and extending the Obamacare subsidies, because people are seeing tremendous spikes in their premiums. Is this going to come back to bite someone down the road?
So I think, obviously the two main things I think are obviously healthcare is one key issue that people are very worried about, and I think the other is immigration. And I think it depends on who you ask. I think, the Republicans and Democrats have different views as to, some of the people who are non-U.S. citizens of should they be getting healthcare or not. And that is a controversial issue for both parties. I think that's something that they clearly have to do. I think the healthcare premiums have clearly gone up a lot over the last 10 years since the Affordable Care Act was passed. And I think that's something that hopefully the administration looks at as to how to lower those premiums. And I think that's really the real question is, can both parties really try to negotiate to lower those premiums and figure out either other ways to cut the government to lower those premiums, or it becomes just bad for all of the U.S. citizens. And I hope that this becomes a nonpartisan issue, which is really what should be happening right now.
Yeah, that would be indeed great. And people are celebrating, for lack of a better term, right now, but there are obstacles. Let's talk about what could hold up this deal and how it moves forward. The move to end the filibuster that the Republicans had floated, clearly that is going to weigh into the discussions.
Yeah, obviously the first is obviously the vote in the Senate, and I think that obviously is the first part. The House vote seems like assuming that there's a negotiation behind closed doors, that still really requires a lot of horse trading with all the Republicans and Democrats to pass at the House. It seems like right now, and I think this is typically what happens when kind of the levee breaks with the vote from a supermajority, clearly people start to scramble to see what they can get out of this deal. And I think right now you're seeing the Democrats try to figure out what else can they add to this. One of the things in the new bill, there's increased security for government employees, right? So that's obviously something that both Republicans and Democrats want. So I really think that they're going to figure out a way to put a bunch of stuff within it. They are talking about obviously getting a lot of the government, especially the SNAP program, funded for January 30th, which is a very good thing. And I think what you'll see is a lot of the programs they're talking about funding through the entire government fiscal year, which will give, I think, both parties a lot more time to negotiate something. But it's never clear as to what they're trying to put through these bills, unfortunately. These bills are extremely complicated. They're sent at the last minute to both Republicans and Democrats, and sometimes, unfortunately, some of the special interests are the ones who really win in some of these bills that are passed through. But I think there's at least progress for essential services. Obviously, the military, obviously air traffic control, and the SNAP program. Those seem to be the three crucial things that really just need to get passed so that both parties can pass something that really helps to try to improve the healthcare premiums going into next year.
It's not a good look. These government shutdowns, these ugly partisan battles that we see. What message do you believe this infighting sends to the international community? For international viewers, it must seem like quite a mess, and people wondering, how can the U.S. go through this time and time and time again?
Yeah, I would say, unfortunately, the U.S. certainly does not seem like a cohesive governing body, is how I would describe it. I think all these things, there's a lot of feudal tribalism that's going on right now, where unfortunately, I think a lot of the other countries, outside the U.S., they have more, they just have a different system, right? Obviously, the democratic system is quite complicated in the U.S. There's a lot of parties. It's a fairly complicated legislative process. And I think obviously to have the government shut down for 41 days for any country, that's never a positive. So I think on one hand, that clearly is disruptive. On the other side, I think the U.S. government is obviously prepared for essential services. They continue to fund all the programs that are needed through a shutdown. So it's not as if the entire government is completely shut down. But clearly we're seeing there's a point at which where it becomes very disruptive to both the country, the economy, the stock market. And I think to other countries, clearly we need to have strong leadership and strong, kind of nationalism, right, to try to solve these problems as people, not parties. And I think in general, you're seeing a lot of people trying to figure out kind of what both parties are trying to accomplish, right? I think there's very different divergent views of each administration over the last 8 years of what they're trying to accomplish. And I hope that people kind of just figure out that there is a human element of this, of trying to just improve the country, not just trying to help some of the parties accomplish certain of their goals.
Yeah, and for federal workers and travelers who have been stranded or had flights canceled, how quickly do you believe a deal could translate into real world relief?
Yeah, so I think for travel specifically, the FAA, they talked about cuts last week. I think to some extent they were doing that for safety, but I think they were also doing that as a leverage point from the Republicans to say the last thing that the Republicans want, or the Democrats want, is to go into a busy holiday Thanksgiving season with a lot of cuts. Obviously it's the busiest travel day of the year around the Thanksgiving holiday, then going into the Christmas. So there's a pretty small window, I think, to kind of to pass this continuing resolution. And I think that's where kind of the Republicans saw the max amount of pain that they could do through this process. So I think in general, that obviously is, first and foremost, the last thing you want is people not seeing their family. And I think the other part, obviously, with the FAA, as long as they're saying that they will do the back pay, I do think that this can be improved very quickly. Most of the employees who are not coming to work right now, unfortunately, they're not getting paid, right? I think the safety issue is also a secondary issue, but it's dependent on the people. So it can be turned on very quickly within days, as long as the government just, is able to convince the workers, which they will, that they will get back pay. I believe this could be fixed in, the coming days.